Hi, I'm Dr. Siva. I am a co-founder of Proficeo Consultants, and we are here at Magic's event, Global Entrepreneurship Community, and I run the FinTech Lab cluster. So I just hosted the FinTech cluster. As you know, FinTech is really exploding today. Everyone is talking about FinTech. There are a lot of changes coming on in the banking and financial services industry. So we got this group together that consisted of entrepreneurs, it consisted of banks, of regulators. We got them all together to talk about what's happening in FinTech today. A lot of interesting ideas, and we know some very interesting things are going to happen over the next few years. I think there's a lot of things that are happening today in the fintech industry. There's a lot of disruption that's happening today. I personally predict that in the next 10 years, banks will not exist, or they won't exist in the same way. Banks will have to become technology companies. Banks will have to disrupt their own services if they are going to survive. And I think that's already happening today in terms of small technology companies coming up and providing a lot of services, and they are disrupting the banks. The banks are rather worried, and they are also looking at what they can do. I think in the future, a lot of technology companies are going to come up. They're going to offer a lot of services, and I think it's really going to take away a lot of business from the banks. That's already happening today with P2P, peer-to-peer lending. In some countries like China, 90 billion has already been lent out on peer-to-peer lending. So I think there's significant changes on the landscape, and it's going to happen in Malaysia as well. If you really look at what's happening today in other parts of the world, if you look at China, for example, peer-to-peer lending has grown so much that 90 billion US dollars have happened on peer-to-peer lending. That means the banks have actually lost 90 billion of revenue to peer-to-peer lending. If you look at places like the UK, for example, 13% of SME business loans are now on peer-to-peer lending platforms. If you look at what's going to happen in Malaysia, it's already starting to happen. The Securities Commission has approved 6 peer-to-peer lending operators. They're going to start in the second quarter of next year. And once that starts, you will see a lot of companies going onto peer-to-peer lending networks to start borrowing on peer-to-peer. Because it's going to be easier, it's going to be less documentation, you don't have to go through the whole difficult process of trying to borrow money from a bank, right? And if that happens, you will see the banks actually losing a lot of revenue, because 70% of a bank's revenue is from lending operation. They make money on interest from lending operation, right? So if they lose that, it's going to be significant. And it's already going to happen, because the Securities Commission has approved it already. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but we know it's already starting. We have equity crowdfunding as well, and we think a lot more is going to happen in the next few years. If you look at banks today, they're actually one of the most regulated industries you will find, right? There's regulation from Bank Negara Malaysia, there's regulation from the Ministry of Finance, the regulation from the Securities Commission. It's a highly regulated industry anywhere in the world. You've got regulations in terms of money laundering, you've got lots of it, right? And regulation is what keeps the banking system going as it is today. But with fintech, right, a lot of them are actually outside the regulated system. But if you want to lend money, you still have to follow regulation, right? Peer-to-peer networks and so on. So I think regulation will happen, but I think you cannot stop the progress of technology. Technology will happen, whether you like it or not, whether you want to happen or not, it's going to happen. And it's already happening. You have bitcoins today. If you want to buy money and save it, you can save it in bitcoins. And it's not regulated, and you can't regulate it, right? So because of that, I think, yes, regulation will happen. Regulation is good because you do have to protect the interests of the man in the street, the ordinary people. But I think regulation will change and will adapt. We see that happening already with the Securities Commission, right? And we think more of that will happen. So we think regulation will happen, regulation will improve, and I think they will adapt. So I don't think that's going to be a major issue.